Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. Welcome to another buying guide video. Today we're going to be talking about the 2008 to 2013 Toyota Highlander. This is a common problems / buying guide video for those who own one or who are looking to buy one. But before we get started, if you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. If you are new to the channel, this is the first time you watch one of my videos, first thank you for watching the video. Consider subscribing to the channel, check out my other videos. I hope you can find something that is helpful for you. But without further ado, let's dig right into it. Starting with engines, and we're gonna start with the V6 engine. The V6 engine was a very good engine in these cars, and this was the first year that the Highlander got it, the 3.5 2GR FE engine. Now, in the very early years, 2008, 2009, we had a problem with variable valve timing rattling noises, which eventually leads to the gears coming apart and causing all kinds of issues. If you are buying one or if you own one, if you must start the car when it's completely cold, has sat overnight, you're going to start the car, you're going to notice a very loud rattling noise for like up to 5 seconds. Now, if this is the case and you're buying one, walk away, because this repair is super expensive. The engine has to come down, as you can see in this picture, and it's not worth the risk. And if this comes apart, as you can see in this picture, this is actually one that's come apart. I mean, the cost is just, we're talking thousands. Easily, as the date of filming this video, will easily exceed the cost of the car. So this is something you should know. If you're worried about this, by late 2009, 2010 and up, this problem was fixed. This was an issue internally in the gear. It was fixed. You should have no issues. However, I would still check it regardless. Any of these series you're buying, you gotta start it when it's cold. If you hear that rattling noise, walk away. It's not worth it. Now, another couple leaks that are pretty serious on this car. Any oil line that is rubber is notorious to get brittle and leak. Two notable ones are the VVTi supply line and the oil cooler line. Unfortunately, they're not extremely easy to check. When they leak, there's gonna be oil all over the place, and it's the kind of leak that you start the car, giant puddle under the car immediately. If you are buying one of these cars, have your mechanic, or you're welcome to email me. I'll help you, walk you through it, how to check them. The fix for these lines is simple. You replace the line with an all metal line that doesn't have that little section of rubber, and you're all good. If you're buying one, you want this checked. If the lines are rubber, get them replaced right away with all metal lines, and you'll never have to think about this problem. This problem can be fatal. We've seen so many engines fail because of this. Be careful with this one. One more oil leak on the V6 engine is the front timing cover leak. This one is super common on these, all the year range, and this is one that I would definitely inspect. It's very easy to look at, very easy to inspect. Here's how you inspect for this leak. Now, if that area is dry, you're all good. If it's leaking, unfortunately, this is an engine out job, very expensive. It's just a tube of sealer that costs $16, but the engine has to come out. There's no way to do it in the car. Some will say, yes, you can do it in the car. Yeah, but how long are you gonna guarantee that incorrectly done job? That's up to you. But this one is very simple to look at. If you own one that is leaking, unfortunately, this is the reality of these engines. This is one Achilles heel, is oil leaks, and this is one of them. However, keep an eye on the leak, clean it up, see how far it progresses, and then make a decision from there. Another thing that is very common on these V6 engines are water pump failures. And it's either gonna be a water pump leak or a rattling noise that goes up and down with the RPM of the engine. Now, here's a water pump from the V6. This is one that failed. It had a little leak. We were doing some other engine works and we replaced it. Now, what you're gonna have is either this pink crust all over the place, all over the side of the engine, and the coolant's going low, or this pulley right here that turns, this turns the impeller and circulates the coolant. This will have significant movement. If this has significant movement, it's gonna start making a rattling noise. Again, this can get a little expensive, but it's not a deal breaker. If you have one with a slightly leaking water pump, or you have that rattling sound and you're buying it, negotiate the price. This could be a good negotiation. If you can find a trusted mechanic outside the dealer, the cost will be less. They are a little expensive, but the pump has been updated. Although we've seen the updated pump leak, but not at the same rate as the old one. So that's something you should know about the water pumps. Moving on to another issue, which this more affects the 2011-13, the oil change schedule. Now this has been debated and debated, the 10,000 mile oil change. It is your car, it is your money. I am just advising you from what I see. Doing the oil change at 10,000 miles 1 year could, in the future, have issue with oil contamination. And the first victim of that is the VVTi system, the variable valve timing system. You will have oil control valve failures, codes, misfires. All these issues are easily avoided with 5,000 mile oil changes every 6 months. The oil will always be clean. The oil control valves will not clog, but if they do, typically you'll have some timing codes, and it's the oil control valves that are sticking or clogged or completely stuck and not moving at all. So something you want to know about, if you're buying one with a check engine light, you gotta know what the codes are. Never buy a car blind without knowing what the check engine light codes are. Let's talk briefly about the 2.7 liter engine, the 1AR FE. Now, I personally don't recommend you buy a Highlander with a 4-cylinder, not because of the engine, but because you're buying an SUV, you're gonna fill up with people and their stuff, and you're gonna use it as an SUV. The 4-cylinder, while a great engine in other cars, not the best choice for the Highlander. However, if you find one, you like it, you're happy with the power level of the engine, here's something you should know about this engine. They are notorious for oil consumption. I have seen so many, and I'm sure somebody will comment on the video saying, I have a 2.7, I have 2, 3, 400,000 miles, and I have no issues. And I'm very happy for that. But I will say this, if this engine is not maintained properly, I'm talking about oil changes, you will have the oil consumption issue. And something notorious for this engine when it does have oil consumption is that people run it low on oil. Run this engine low on oil enough, and you're gonna have the variable valve timing gear explode, break the chain, and I'll show you this picture. This is carnage. This engine was completely destroyed, and this was a 2011. And this picture is actually a little old, so this car was not that old. It was not 9 years old. So be careful with the 4-cylinders. I advise not to buy one unless you know the service history, everything was done properly and well. And if you end up buying it, I highly recommend you continue with 5,000 mile, 6 months oil changes. This engine is known for oil consumption, so be careful with this one. Moving on to transmissions, and we're also going to address a few issues with the all-wheel drive system toward the end. Now, the transmission in these Highlanders is pretty bulletproof. There's no chronic issues or things that would make me tell you not to buy one, if you would. However, there are a few things that you should know about this transmission. First, it's very common for this transmission to develop small oil leaks. Mainly, there's a side cover on the transmission. You'll see oil through the driver's side wheel well. You'll see oil all over the transmission, underneath it, and then covering the bottom of the transmission. And this brings people in a panic to the dealership. Hey, my transmission is leaking oil. Thing is, that side cover is not exactly a pressure point. So if you clean that leak, it'll probably be another 5 years until you get the leak again. I'm not really worried too much about that one. If you have it, if you're buying one and you see that leak, negotiate the price, but don't worry too much about that leak, because honestly, so many of them leak like that, and it takes them years and years to accumulate an actual dripping leak. One thing I will tell you about this Highlander, the V6 model has a huge cover that covers underneath everything, covers everything. Every time you're buying one, this cover is coming off. You tell the dealership, I need it on a lift, I need that cover off. If the dealership declines, then so do you on buying the car. It's as simple as that. You remove that cover, all of a sudden you see everything covered in oil that you didn't see before. I see this all the time. This cover needs to come off if you're going to inspect for any leak. Another common one on the transmission for these Highlanders is a whining noise. Now, this is a very faint whining noise, very consistent. On light acceleration, you'd hear it whine. As soon as you take your foot off the gas, it goes away. This whine noise have brought so many Highlander owners and got their transmissions replaced and the whole 9 yards. Don't be alarmed by this noise. This is just a harmonic vibration of the transmission from the final drive. There is nothing broken, there is nothing bad, it's just the way it is. Now, if you have an extended warranty with this car or you're buying one, sure, go get a new trans. You pop up in any dealership, it's a known problem, they'll immediately order a transmission, get it authorized, life is good. But if you don't have a warranty or you're looking to buy a car that potentially will not have a warranty and you hear that noise, absolutely use it as a negotiating factor here, but don't worry about it. If it bothers you, then maybe look for a car that doesn't, but just know that if you buy a car that doesn't whine, as you put miles, it might start whining, and I wouldn't worry about it. Nothing is broken. Just raise the volume of the radio or something if it really bothers you, but I'm not concerned about it. Let's move on to all-wheel drive system on this car. Now, it is a very good system. It does have a couple things, and mainly with oil leaks, and you'll see the theme of this car is oil leaks. Now, there is a common leak from the transfer case. It's a seal that sits between the transfer case and the transmission. It's a double lip seal. It leaks, and in some cases, it mixes transmission fluid with differential fluid. Now, this leak is kind of hard to see. Again, you got to remove that big cover. Any oil, transmission, or differential fluid sitting around the transfer case area, it is likely that seal, and this is a pretty big job because the transmission has to come out of the car. Yes, you could possibly get the transfer case out without pulling the engine out, but it's nonetheless an expensive repair. As I said, the theme with this car is oil leaks. Again, the 2008, as of the date of filming this video, is a 12-year-old car. It's gonna have leaks. So you gotta do your due diligence. Have that cover removed. Look very close for oil leaks. You don't see any oil leaks anywhere. Everything is nice and dry. I think that's a good car to buy. If you have some oil leaks, make your best judgment. It's up to you. Now you know all the common leaks in these cars. Make your decision what you're willing to live with and what not, and how you're gonna negotiate that price. Now, another common leak on these is the tail shaft of the rear drive shaft leaking oil through the drive shaft. Now, I've seen people put seals and replace. It's the drive shaft that's causing the leak. Oil goes through the yoke and leaks, and you'll see a lot of oil at the tail shaft of the rear drive shaft, of where it connects to the transfer case. Again, just like we said, you gotta do your due diligence on oil leaks on this car when you're checking one. And if you own one, it's a drive shaft replacement. You can replace the seal, the leak will be back. It's a common problem. So something to know about leaks for this one. Another thing that is not very common and really not a fault of the car design itself, the rear differential if it's all-wheel drive model. We've seen a few essentially blow up due to lack of maintenance. So if you're buying a car that doesn't have a service history on the differentials, replace the fluid. It's very cheap, it's very easy, very DIY by the way. It's just 2 plugs, drain, fill through the other plug, and we're done. Consider that, don't forget those, because we've seen some fail from lack of maintenance. Usually when you drain these fluids around 30,000, 40,000 miles, when these cars were new, The fluid is pretty dark and you want to keep up with it. Between 30 and 60,000 miles, don't go further than that. If you bought a car again with no service history or unknown, just replace it. Be on the safe side. Moving on to body, and we got quite a few things here, so hang with me. I know this video is getting long. The first issue is with the back door or the hatch door or the tailgate, if you would. It mainly has to do with the power operation of that door. If you have a manual one, this problem really isn't a big problem. But the power operation, you gotta make sure that that back door works 100% perfect. And I say it perfect because it was a super common problem with these because of the design of the one-sided motor lift in the back door. Because it's lifting on one side, it's tending to bend the door and bend the hinges. There's not really anything you can do about that. And what really aggregates the situation is pushing the door and kind of manhandling the door, if you would. The most common problem is as the door is closing, it reaches a point where it hits and opens back up. This is the door bent, or worse, the hinge is bent. Now, Toyota did have some coverage on this, but likely most of these are out of this coverage. You'd want to call your Toyota dealership for that. If you are out of coverage and the door is doing that, in some cases, the only way to fix that is to replace the hinge and the whole door. That, as you can imagine, is a pretty expensive proposition, so be careful with that one. Make sure you focus on the back door. Another common issue, and also with doors, is front doors. Now, this is very common mostly on the driver's door, but we've also seen it on the passenger front door. Now, the bolts that hold the glass that goes up and down in the door come loose. And this is a problem that kind of has a snowball effect. First, the bolts come loose. Now the window, every time you put it up and down, it makes like a clicking or a thud, or as it closes, as it opens, it feels like something is loose. What do most people do? They ignore it. It's working. I'm not worried about it. Sure, why not? Then one of the bolts falls off. Inside the door, you'll find it. Then the window starts coming off the track. And believe it or not, some people will still ignore that. I can just hold it and close it. But then both bolts fall, glass falls, and you keep trying to operate it, and the regulator gets bent. So now you went from just tightening two bolts to finding one bolt that fell off and putting it back and life is good, to now you're replacing the regulator. I don't understand why people do that, but you're watching this video, you know about this issue. If you have a rattling noise when the window's going up and down or clicking or any kind of issues, you gotta do this. It's very DIY. You just take the door panel, find two bolts, tighten them. Or if you don't want to keep doing this over and over, take the bolt, put a little bit of Loctite, not high strength, put it back, and that's it. You'll never have this problem again. I see this is super common on these Highlanders. It seems to be more common on the 2011-13 for some reason. But nonetheless, they're common on all. Make sure you check these windows. If you hear that noise, you gotta tighten these bolts before you bend the regulator, and then you gotta replace it. Another thing with these doors, and this is primarily the driver's door for some reason, very few passenger front doors, but nonetheless front doors. Same type of clicking noise, but this time, every time the door is closed, you raise the window. As it's raising up, it makes a click. As it's coming down, it makes another click. You open the door all the way, the click goes away. That's how you differentiate between the loose bolts and this. The loose bolts will rattle regardless. But this second issue we're talking about is only when the door is closed. If you open the door, it goes away. And this is a door check. The doors on these Highlanders are very light, so it's very common for the door to get sprung. Basically, you open it, the wind catches it, and it just opens violently and it stops. Well, do that so many times, the point where the door check mounts to the door is gonna get bent. Now the door check is facing the glass, so every time your glass comes down, it's gonna hit the door check and its way up and down. If you open the door check comes out, nothing. Unfortunately, Again, if you want to fix this 100%, the door will have to be replaced, and that's very expensive. However, we have been successful in bending that area back just far enough so the glass doesn't hit the door check. You gotta check this one, and be generally gentle with the door. Don't let it spring outside so far and get caught by the wind and kind of violently open like that, because you're gonna accelerate this issue. Now, this next issue, although more for the rust belt cars, but we've seen some cases where it was not a rust belt car, so you want to know about this one. The rear wiper. The rear wiper doesn't work, or it's very slow to go up and down. I see people, the first thing, oh, it needs a window motor. They go to replace the window motor, guess what? It's the same thing. Well, the very common problem on these, by the way, if you didn't know, the Highlander, the back glass opens. I see a lot of people not know that. There's a little button you press on the back between the taillights that pops the rear glass. Well, when you open the rear glass, there's a mechanism that stays on the glass, and then there's a motor. That mechanism that stays on the glass is the problem. Not super expensive to fix, kind of scary to DIY because you're essentially working around the glass, and sometimes you have to cut this thing because it's so rusted you can't get the nut off. So if your rear wiper doesn't work or works very slowly, this is 100% the problem. I've never seen a motor go out. It's usually that mechanism on the glass. It's not very expensive. Semi DIY, depends how brave you want to be around the glass. I'm not. I freak out every time I have to be cutting right next to the glass. Wear glasses, please, if you're doing this, because we've had a few windows shatter like that. So check if you're buying one, use that as a negotiating thing, because it's really not a big expense, but don't go replacing motors because that's not the issue. Last item in body is air conditioning. And the air conditioning typically in these Highlanders, pretty bulletproof, with the exception of one issue. If you have rear AC, the rear AC lines that extend basically the length of the car, notorious to leak. And if you live in the Rust Belt, they're notorious to seize. So if the line leaks, you gotta replace a little $2 O-ring. You can't separate the line to replace the O-ring. You have to cut the line, and now you're replacing the whole lines. And now this becomes a big expense. So they're really hard to see, and if they're not leaking today, they might be leaking 2 weeks later. So the moral of this story is, do not buy a car with a non-working AC, because 9 out of 10 times it is the rear AC lines, and it kind of gets pretty expensive as you progress, especially if it's a Rust Belt car. And if you're mechanically inclined and you know how to check lines, it's basically two aluminum looking lines that go all the way from the front all the way to the back of the car. Make sure all the joints, every place where two lines connect is dry. You will see like an oily residue. That's the AC oil leaking through it. That's how you know they're leaking. So something to know about the AC in this car. Moving on to chassis. And the first item in chassis is a very common one with all our beloved Toyotas. Clunking noise when you turn the wheel at slow speeds. It feels like clunk, clunk, clunk in the steering wheel. Drives most people crazy. Some people are concerned it's a safety item. It's neither. Now, here is the offender in this case. This is called the steering intermediate shaft. This is a shaft that has splines right here. It just moves. This is supposed to be part of the collapsible steering column when in an accident. Now, these two splines right here, I can't make it happen right now because you need the weight of the car and the tension of the steering. All happens with that noise is these two shafts are clunking against each other because there's no grease here. Now, you can put some grease here and that'll be gone temporarily, or you can replace the shaft with an updated model and you won't have that issue again. If you're buying one, you need to make a big deal about this because you could really bring the price down of the car. If you own one, I wouldn't worry about it. If it drives you crazy, which I will admit, it would drive me crazy, have this lubricated or replace it and we're done. You won't have this problem again. But just remember, it is not a huge problem. It is actually just an annoyance more than anything. Another item on chassis are struts. Now, they're not extremely chronic like some other models, but we've seen enough struts leaking. And typically on this one, you'll really know when a strut is leaking. You'll hear like a big rattling noise over bumps and kind of a general instability of the whole car. Again, if you're buying one, make sure you check the struts. You'll just see a general leak. Refer to my other video on how to check for leaks on struts and what constitutes a strut leak and what is normal. Another thing on struts is front strut mounts. Now this one we've seen a lot because the way of the design of the cowl in the front, water seems to channel and sit on top of the strut mount, basically rotting it out. And this is regardless if it's rust belt or not. And these strut mounts, they start initially making noise, and if they fail, they could cause a very unstable ride. So something to know about this car, and a very easy way to check them is jack up the front of the car. As you're jacking it up, look at the wheel. It's going to get to a point where the wheel will just drop significantly and make like a little clunk. That's the strut mount essentially separating, and that's the drop off it. And another way, if it didn't do that, with both front wheels off the ground, turn the wheel. You'll feel it like clunk, 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 clunk as it's turning. That means the mount is, as it's extended and overloaded, if it's cracked or broken, it's gonna start making that noise. Again, they're very common. If you have, every time you have a leaking strut on this car, you have the strut out for any reason, always put new mounts. It's a good idea. They will fail eventually. They're not extremely expensive. Original aftermarket is even cheaper. I recommend original, but that's up to you. Again, refer to my Toyota suspension and steering guide for more information. Last but not least on chassis, and this one gets a lot of mechanics, believe it or not. This car is very, very common for wheel bearing noises, especially in the rear. And this doesn't seem like a big problem. It's a rear wheel bearing, replace it, move on, life is good. However, because of the design of the car, it is so common that the rear wheel bearing noise is misdiagnosed as a transfer case noise. You do not know how common this is and how many mechanics make their customers spend small fortunes replacing a transfer case that is completely fine, and then put the new transfer case in, few $1,000s later, guess what? The noise is exactly the same. And this throws mechanics into a spin because they don't know what's going on. The thing about it is, and I don't blame the mechanics, this one is kind of an odd one. When you have four wheels off the ground, let's say in a lift situation, the car is on a lift, you have the wheels spinning, the car is in drive, the transfer case will always make noise. That is normal. That's because you're not loading the wheels. That's normal for this transfer case to make noise when all four wheels are off the ground. The best way to check for wheel bearings on this car, from experience, have the wheels off the ground, put the car in drive, wheels are spinning, put your hand on the spring, the coil spring between the strut and the mount. Put your hand on it, you'll feel like that roughness on one of the rear wheel bearings. Replace it, car is nice and quiet. These cars are generally very smooth and very quiet. Any noise, you're gonna know. If you're buying one, you drove and you feel like roughness, that's a rear wheel bearing. And it feels more in the middle of the car and it just spreads all over the body. That's just a common thing with these cars, so be careful. Do not go replacing a transfer case because of the bad rear wheel bearing. Moving on to electrical, and just like all other Toyotas, we don't have crazy electrical problems and gremlins and this and that. These cars are generally they're basic. They have some advanced features, but they're generally basic and they don't have chronic problems. There's only one problem that seemed to plague the 2011 to 2013. And I'll be honest, this was the type of problem that we had heard of them, and then all of a sudden we don't hear about it again. I don't know, it's because of these cars out of warranty, they're going somewhere else. But nonetheless, you need to know about this. Door locks. All of a sudden, door locks stopped working. 2 days later, they start working again, all four of them. There was a common problem with the body control ECU. Unfortunately, the whole ECU needs to be replaced. There's no really fix for it. So if you're looking to buy one, or you have a car that has a randomly stopping power locks, this is your issue. It's semi-expensive to replace, somewhat DIY. There's no programming involved or anything. You just a module, you replace it and we're done. Now, another issue with power locks, the issue with the body control ECU will affect all 4 doors at the same time. This issue we're going to talk about affects a single door. We've had somewhat of a high rate of failure of actuators. If one door stops working and then it starts, then it's like you see the lock move slowly. That's a door lock actuator. It can get expensive if you buy original, but something to know about these models. Let's talk about hybrids. And you need to know that there are essentially 2 hybrid models in this year range of the Highlander. 2008 2010 had the wonderful 3MZ engine. The 2011 to the 2013 had the also wonderful 2GR-FE. Sorry, not FE-FXE. Now, the difference between the two is obviously the 2GR is more modern, potentially better gas mileage, but remember the V6 oil leaks we talked about also apply to the hybrid model. On the 3MZ, we've had some coolant leaks, especially from the water pump. And remember, most people don't remember this. This is potentially the last Toyota with a timing belt. 2010 Highlander. I like timing belt engines. They were very quiet. They were very easy to work on, extremely DIY. However, do not forget that timing belt, and that's also an additional maintenance item that you need to deal with. So every 90,000 miles, gotta replace that timing belt. And I highly recommend you replace the water pump. They're very common to leak. And remember, this water pump, unlike the V6, if this water pump decides to quit, it's gonna throw the timing belt. Now the car is gonna shut off and you're gonna have bigger issues. So something to know about the hybrids. The hybrids are generally very reliable as long as the maintenance is done right. The main emphasis of maintenance is the hybrid battery cooling fan vents. They're located underneath the back seat. Do not block them. Make sure you clean the screen regularly. There's no replaceable filter for those, but you can pop the screen out, clean it, and put it back. Life is good. Do not cover it. I see people put stuff in the back, covering the vents. If you're buying a hybrid or you own one, you need to be aware that that screen is there. It needs to be clear. It needs to be free flowing so the hybrid battery won't overheat, which, by the way, the #1 cause of failure of hybrid batteries is overheating from clogged vents. Another thing on the hybrids, there was a recall in the early ones for an IPM replacement or intelligent power module replacement. This is a recall that hasn't reoccurred. We haven't had issues with the newer ones with the IPM. However, if you're buying an early hybrid, make sure that recall was done. If it was not done, you need to get it done as soon as possible because that could disable the hybrid system and now the car shuts off. This was really the only problem. And the general theme with Toyota, overall their models, when there is a problem serious enough and chronic enough that is kind of occurring very early, and these IPM failures were very early, they tend to take care of it, either recall, customer support program, and hence the reason why you're buying a Toyota. They really take care of their customers. People ask me what are the best years to buy. This one is pretty simple, 2011 to 2013. Granted that you have checked for leaks and there are no leaks, or there are leaks but you are well aware of them and willing to live with them and you've negotiated the price right. If you own one of these cars, most people that own these cars keep them for a very long time. I have seen multiples that go 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 miles without major issues. Yeah, leaks here and there and some expenses, but they're generally solid cars that, as the date of filming this video, these things are a little older. You can really get one that is nice, taken care of for a really good price, and you're buying a lot of car for that money. So the hybrids, I love the 3MZ engine, but I would tell you to buy 11, 13. They're revised, the hybrid system is revised, it's better. And generally, between you and me, I don't like the hybrids very much in this model. They're not my favorite. The gas mileage advantage is not significant. Now, this was the case when these things were new and you were paying a lot more for a hybrid, but today, They're similarly priced. If you see a hybrid, you're intrigued by the technology and the slight advantage in gas mileage, sure, go for it. 2011 and 13 is my recommendation. Well, I hope this video was helpful and informative. Good luck with your Highlander if you own one. They're awesome cars. I personally like these cars, and the prices they're going for today, it is a huge bargain. Make sure you do your due diligence if you're buying one. Check all the problems. Now you know what the common things with these cars are. If you're new to the channel, you like this video, consider subscribing to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. You're also welcome to follow the channel on Instagram and Facebook for sneak peeks of upcoming videos. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have a wonderful day.